Okay, let's talk about how to read the Bible in an expansive way. In preparation for our crime and punishment read, I put out the call for you to not only pick up your version of crime and punishment, but the King James version of the Bible, the 1611 version. And I'd be really interested to know what your initial or your first gut reaction to that was. Was it one of delight? Was it one of curiosity? One of, oh, now I've got an excuse to read the Bible? Was it one of resistance, whether you think it might be a bit too difficult, or whether it was the religion aspect that might have put you off? First reactions, gut reactions, they're key to unlocking our understanding. So let me know what your first reaction was, and let's get into it. Let's talk about reading the Bible in an expansive way. Let's get one thing out of the way first. When we talk about reading the Bible as literature, which is a bit of a funny thing to say, because we wouldn't talk about reading Aristotle as literature. He is part of the Western canon, part of the Western tradition. We wouldn't talk of reading Milton's Paradise Lost, as literature. It is literature. You wouldn't talk about reading any of the 5 great epics of the Western tradition as literature. You wouldn't talk about reading Milton's Paradise Lost as literature, or Homer's Iliad or Odyssey as literature, Virgil's Aeneid, Dante's Divine Comedy. These are grand epics, and just like the Bible, many people put off reading them for fear that the difficulty is insurmountable, and they are difficult. Reading an epic is one of the most difficult things you can read, and it's quite clear, at least to me, that it's one of the most difficult things that someone can write, because we don't have many of them. There is a lack of epics. Wordsworth tried with the Prelude, kind of abandoned it. Byron tried it with Don Juan, kind of abandoned it. Apart from those 5 that I've just mentioned and those 4 writers, we don't really have many epics that are worth reading. Keats abandoned many of his. He didn't live long enough, unfortunately. Now, we can change what we consider to be epics. We can talk about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Not really an epic, it's a mosaic, it's a composite of many different stories. But it has epic qualities. We could talk about Tolstoy's War and Peace as an epic, but we know it's a little bit different. That's more of a sprawling, monstrous thing. We could talk about Shakespeare's entire canon as an epic, and in the same way that people devour the Game of Thrones series or any other fantastical series, one can work their way throughout the entirety of Shakespeare's oeuvre, and you'll be treated to an epic of proportions unlike anything else in the world apart from the Bible. Now, obviously, when we talk about reading the Bible as literature, we risk offending people, because you can either read the Bible as literature, or you can read the Bible canonically. What does it mean to read something canonically? It means you're reading it as a sacred, holy text. You're reading it with the belief that what you're reading is the Word of God. It's instrumental for teaching you how to lead your life with a sense of high morality and purpose to a higher power. The Bible can give a lot of people comfort. It doesn't give me comfort. I've tried to read the Bible in times of trouble, and though it is high wisdom literature and it always gives me something to think about, if I approach it correctly. Now, the correct way, in my opinion, to read the Bible is to give it a lot of digestion time, to mull over the wisdom, to carry it around with you. Just as there are tons of reading challenges all online, in the Christian community there are a ton of Bible reading challenges. Read the Bible in a year. And the problem with that I see is that it once again treats a very resonant work, a work that people do read with utmost reverence and respect, a really core influential text, and it can be influential to you whether you have a secular belief or not, whether you're atheist, agnostic, whether you're part of another religion. It can be really valuable to you, but the moment you start rushing to read anything or thinking that you can ever finish something, you've kind of already defeated the purpose before you've even started. The journey never ends. There's a Latin maxim that's actually taken from the Greek that I find resonant, almost as resonant as memento mori, remember you must die. And the saying is ars longa, vita brevis. Chaucer in the Parliament of Fowls, he paraphrased this and he said, the life so short, the craft so long to learn. Basically, the journey never ends, and you mustn't think that there is an end. We have an obligation to bring ourselves to the work, and this is where I'm kind of split on whether this could be blasphemous or not when I'm talking about reading the Bible as high literature. Because just because I read it as literature, just because I might consider Yahweh a protagonist, just as I delight in the different stories and the conceptualizations of them, I do read it with reverence. But then again, I read a lot of literature with reverence. I read Shakespeare canonically. Shakespeare is my text, my religious text, even though he's ostensibly of no religion. People try to pin down his religion. Was he Protestant? Was he Catholic? They try to pin down his politics. You can't do it. And that's by design, because it wouldn't have been very smart for Shakespeare to be very overt about his belief system. It would have been much smarter to have no belief system, which I think we might all identify with today. So I read Shakespeare canonically. I bring myself fully to each and every text that we read. Anna Karenina was my Bible when I first read it, and when I reread it, it's my reading of Scripture, because it illuminates self-understanding, it illuminates my relationship with God and the rest of the world, it illuminates my relationship to my work. You can never finish the work, but that doesn't mean you don't have an obligation or a duty to carry it out. You must bring yourself fully to it, as much as possible, bring as much as you can to it, but acknowledge that the journey never ends. Now, regarding this ars longa, vita brevis, the art so long but life so short, I would like to quote to you something from Rabbi Tarfon. He says, "The day is short and the work is great, and the labourers are sluggish, and the wages are abundant, and the master of the house is demanding. It is not necessary," Rabbi Tarfon also says, "it is not necessary for you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." It's not necessary for you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. That's why we never finish these books in the book club. The conversation is always open. Our potential for growth, for illumination, for consciousness expanding, for increased awareness and empathy and love, this is always open. That never finishes. When you read a really resonant book, you don't put it down and put it on your shelf and forget about it. Well, lots of people do. Anybody here in this book club, you watching right now, you do not. That's why you were drawn to this book club, as opposed to something else which might have been more of a book bucket list where you tick it off. Some people have very lovely bookshelves and they keep all the books in clean, pristine condition. They never crack the spines, they never dog ear them, and they look lovely, they colour code them, but they don't have the contents of those books in their mind, heart. They don't have the contents in their soul. They haven't lived the books. Now, Harold Bloom, responding to Rabbi Tarfon, he said that to Tarfon, "The day is short and the work endless, and we tend to be sluggish labourers. The Yahweh of the temple is demanding, since the wages of his covenant are high. They are the blessing of more life on into a time without boundaries." So yes, the day is short, and the day is a synodokical metaphor where one part of the whole signifies the whole. The day represents our life, and if we pull back far enough from ourselves, humans might as well be mayflies. You know, mayflies only live for a day. What can you accomplish in a day? The day is short, and the work is endless. Now, if you're despairing, if you're somebody like Albert Camus, who we'll talk about in regards to Crime and Punishment, who wrote The Myth of Sisyphus, a work commenting on that myth about Sisyphus, who was damned to push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll down again, so he could push it up again. We can be really defeatist and nihilistic about it, or we can see it as we're part of a wellspring of humanity. This idea that every poem is not an individual poem, but it's part of a larger tapestry that connects to the whole. We're all connected here. That's why we're making reading a communal activity, because we're communing with the author, ourselves, whatever higher power we believe in, and each other. And that's really important. So yes, the day is short, and the work is endless. That is not a reason to not do it. That's not a reason to not bring yourself fully to these great works and derive as much insight and enjoyment out of them as possible. That's not a reason not to try and deliver that insight onto other people, make each other better. And we tend to be sluggish labourers. Yeah, we're human. We can be tired, we can be grumpy, we can be irritable, we can be angry. We can go through the whole gamut of negative human emotions, and that can slow us down. as well. And the Yahweh of the temple is demanding, since the wages of his covenant are high. I don't want to get too far into the spirituality sector for fear of maybe putting off some people who are really vehemently anti that. But whatever your conception of God is, it doesn't have to be the traditional conception of an old man in a white beard and a robe in the sky. God can be wherever you find fulfilment. And we'll talk about in Crime and Punishment this sense of meaninglessness, the sense of God is dead. I don't think Nietzsche, when he said God is dead, he didn't actually mean God is dead, now there's no point to life. He meant we are now faced with the sometimes insurmountable proposition of constructing our own meaning. And as Ernest Becker says, all that's left for us to do is to fashion something. It could be anything. And it's a small drop into the confusion. It's our offering up to the life force. If you're drawn to these great books and you're drawn to picking them apart and thinking about them, journaling upon them, convincing others to read them, befriending characters like we did with Anna Karenina, we befriended Levin and Dolly and Kitty. If you're drawn to that, then what is that mysterious force inside you that's compelling you towards that? Now, why are we reading the Bible? Well, we're reading the Bible because so many people, practically everybody, was influenced by it. Okay, and we used to be able to assume a certain level of acquaintance with students coming to the humanities in regards to the Bible. We could also assume the same level of acquaintance with Shakespeare and Chaucer, but no, we can't no longer. It's actually very specialised and somewhat stigmatised. But the effect that a reader would have got from approaching a book like Crime and Punishment back in the day when it was written and published, 1866, the effect would be different from the effect that many of us would get now. Because when you read part one, you'll see that there's a lot of touching upon different psalms, different stories from the New Testament, and it would go over your head if you weren't already acquainted with them. Now, those of us like myself who were raised religiously, I was raised Roman Catholic, went to a Roman Catholic school, was christened, baptized, got Holy Communion, confirmation, all that. We have these biblical stories and ideas sort of downloaded into our minds. They're just assumed shared knowledge. But many people don't know these stories. So when you read Marmeladov touching upon a biblical story, you miss a lot. So that's one of the reasons why we read the Bible, because at its very least, it will illuminate all the great books that we're going to read. But essentially, a lot of these great books were the writer's own attempt to illuminate that book. So it's all a response. And again, risking blasphemy, the Bible is up there as high literature along with Shakespeare, along with Chaucer. How do you read the Bible expansively? Well, you bring yourself to it. You read it carefully. You don't gobble it up. You don't read it voraciously. You try to think about it and apply it to your own life. Question it. Now, that's something that you don't do with a canonical text. If you're reading it in a reverential way, you don't question the good book. It's decreed by God. But we can question it if we're reading it as literature. Not that that's the primary purpose of us reading this literature. The primary purpose is to expand our consciousness and derive great enjoyment out of it. But think over what you're reading. So when I give you a passage to explore in the King James Bible as part of the Dostoevsky read-along, go find that passage as part of your expansive reading and think about it. Read it over a couple of times and really let it work and operate on you. And again, you do not have to be overtly religious or spiritual in order to do this. We will read and look at a lot of different spiritual texts on our journey. Wait until we get into the Eastern stories, Yasunari Kawabata, the art of the haiku and Zen poetry. We're obviously going to want to look at stuff like this over here, the teaching of Buddha. That's highly relevant. That will obviously be super relevant when we talk about Hermann Hesse's Siddharta. We'll look at some Bhagavad Gita when we come to reading Proust. At some point, we might even learn to appreciate the I Ching. The I Ching is extraordinary, and the demands that it makes on someone raised in the Western tradition are also extraordinary. So there is going to be a limit to how much we can get out of books like the I Ching, but it's just fascinating to dip into. And of course, you can read, like I touched upon, you can read so much literature canonically, reverentially. Yeah, you could read William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience as a piece of devotional literature. if you like. So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Devotional reading, literary reading. I think they can be blended. But for a very long time, many writers, even modern writers like T.S. Eliot, fiercely completely denied that the Bible, the King James, whatever version you want to read, they denied that there was any literary pleasure to be had from the Bible. C.S. Lewis was like this as well. According to these writers, you don't read the Bible for literary pleasure. So whatever your relationship with the Bible or any sort of religious wisdom literature, read it with engagement, high engagement. Read it with imagination. The imaginative prowess of the biblical stories is unparalleled. It is powerful stuff. So really, really vividly imagine everything. Now, unfortunately, and this is coming from someone who doesn't speak Hebrew, doesn't speak Greek, I've read that the Hebrew, the Tanakh, the Old Testament essentially, the characters, the individual voices of the characters, they're more individuated. So you can tell characters apart by virtue of their voice. This is something that's lost in the Geneva Bible, the King James Version, and that's a shame, but the King James Version still has considerable poetic power in regards to the English language. Again, having not known any ancient Greek, the New Testament was an upgrade from the Greek, so to speak. So you're reading with engagement, you're reading with imagination, and you're also reading with patience. And I should imagine that some people who are not religious, who perhaps even scorn texts like the Bible because of what role they've played in overt religiosity through the ages, they might say, well, why should I read the Bible with reverence? Again, I return to the fact that we're reading all of these great texts with reverence. And this is no different from a student trying to pass an exam. If you're a lawyer trying to pass the bar, if you're a psychologist trying to get full marks, heck, even me, during my finals at Oxford, I brought myself reverentially and devotedly to my texts, and I read Chaucer as though he were scripture, because you have to. If you want to get a certain result, you have to approach it in a certain way. So you're going to read carefully, with love and patience, because you can never finish it, and although you can never finish it, you are not absolved from the obligation to participate in the work as fully as you possibly can. Now, why am I recommending the King James Version? The King James Version is a powerful piece of poetic wisdom literature. Now, there are a lot of different choices of Bible, but again, which Bible you choose will depend on what your purpose is. Now, do you want to engage with the perfect translation from Hebrew, from Greek? Do you want to engage with what is essentially the true meaning as though it is the word of God? Then the King James Version might not be the version you choose. The King James Version is a very important historical book. For that reason alone, it's important to read it. It came out 1611. What was going on around 1611? You've got Cervantes writing. You've got Shakespeare at the end of his career, and perhaps he would have been reading this right before he died. Although Shakespeare was influenced by the Geneva Bible, Milton was influenced by the Geneva Bible. That was their choice of Bible, which might attest to Protestant sympathies. Either way, the King James Version is about 70% just taken from the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible is also high literature and high poetry, and I'll give you a comparison of the two in just a second. Now, the Geneva Bible was woven together by one of the greatest translators, William Tyndale. He was translating alongside Miles Coverdale and a group that included William Whittingham, William Cole, Thomas Sampson, Christopher Goodman. The King James Version had over 50 different translators, one of which was the pastor Lancelot Andrews, whose sermons I spent my second year at university studying. They really took some of the most powerful poetry from the Geneva and then rendered even more powerful poetry on top of it. The King James Version of the Bible, which is riven through with the inflection and the power of the Geneva Bible, is up there and competing with top spot, along with Shakespeare, for some of the most affecting poetic power in the English language. Let's have a quick comparison of the two. Maybe we can compare to other Bibles as well if you're interested. Like I said, I've picked the King James Version because reading the King James Version is a gateway to the rest of the literary landscape all over the Western world, definitely in America. If you want to read Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, that's the language of the King James Bible. If you want to read Walt Whitman, the cadence and the rhythms, the parataxis, that is all taken from the King James Bible. As an example of just the power of the music, the musicality of the King James Bible, listen to this really famous section. This is from the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, if you want a comparison of the Geneva and the King James Bible, here's the same section. This is from Song of Solomon 8:6, and this is the Geneva. Set me as a seal on thine heart, and as a signet upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are fiery coals, and a vehement flame. And this is the King James Bible. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. So the Bible is going to be a nice add-on to our reading of Crime and Punishment. Any good serious reading program should incorporate a little bit of Bible reading in that program. It will illuminate so much, even if you are not ostensibly Christian. Of course, this type of reading, taking the Bible as literature, might risk offending some people, and indeed the word orthodox comes from two root meanings of Greek, meaning right opinion. This type of reading, it gives a lot of reverence, the type of reading we're doing, reverence to whatever text it is, but whether we're reading Shakespeare or the Bible, there is no right opinion. And I think however these composite writers, however they wrote these stories, I personally believe that a lot of it was wide open to interpretation. Anyway, let me know what your experience with the Bible is, and we'll have some crime and punishment videos coming up real soon.